Welcome back to the deep dive. So, I want to start today in
Yeah.
a place I think we've all been,
Okay.
the yogurt aisle, or maybe the bread aisle. You're standing there holding a package that just looks so incredibly virtuous.
Right. It says all natural or clean label.
Exactly. Or superfood. It looks like it was made by a monk on a mountaintop.
And then you pick up the generic one next to it, which is half the price.
And you just freeze. You honestly don't know if you're paying for better nutrition or, I don't know, just better graphic design.
That paralysis is exactly the point. It's the confused intersection where, marketing psychology completely overtakes nutritional science.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to strip away the buzzwords. We're not just going to complain about labels. We're going to deconstruct them.
We want to understand what's actually inside the package versus what the marketing team wants you to believe is inside.
To do that, we've got a huge stack of research. There's a government study from the NIH on superfoods, a pretty alarming report on hidden additives from the Food Intolerance Network.
We also have a practical guide to ultra-processed foods from UNICEF and a really deep analysis of industry-sponsored science from IPSUD.
Plus some fascinating psychological research on why these labels work so well in our brains. So let's start with the big question. Why do we feel more confused than ever?
Well, the short answer is that the gap between marketing terms and nutritional reality has become a canyon,
The words on the front of the box are designed to sell.
not to inform.
Yeah.
And nowhere is that clearer than with our first topic, the so-called superfood.
I feel like every year there's a new one. First it was kale, then a K, now I think it's mushrooms. But what is a superfood? Is it a scientific thing?
Not even close. That's the first myth to bust. According to that NIH source we looked at, the term superfood was actually introduced in the 1990s purely as a marketing tool.
Wait, really? It sounds so official.
There's no legal or medical definition for it, completely made up. Generally, it just refers to a food that's rich in compounds considered, beneficial for health.
So the NIH study looked at what the internet was calling a superfood.
Exactly. They analyzed 45 different websites.
So let me guess the lineup. Kale has to be number one.
Kale, spinach, salmon, blueberries, avocado, chia seeds. The usual suspects.
Okay, but to be fair, nobody's arguing that eating spinach is a bad idea.
Of course not. These are nutritious foods. But the problem, as the study points out, is just massive oversimplification. The websites present them as miracle cures.
Without the nuance.
Or the downsides.
What downside could there possibly be to kale?
Well, kale is fantastic. It's got antioxidants, vitamin K, vitamin C, but those websites rarely mention that it also contains things called anti-nutritional factors like oxalates or phytates.
Anti-nutritional factors. That sounds
Oh,
counterproductive.
It just means they can hinder your body's ability to absorb certain minerals. They bind to things like calcium and iron.
So if you're only eating kale for your minerals because a blog told you to,
You might not be getting as much as you think. It's
Okay.
not just eat this and live forever. And take blueberries. They're always touted for fighting cancer and heart disease. But a lot of the data for those big claims comes from in vitro studies,
meaning in a petri dish.
in a petri dish, or in animal models. And crucially, they're often using concentrations of extracts that are way, way higher than what you'd get from eating a handful of berries.
So we're taking a lab result and applying it to a human eating a muffin.
Exactly. The takeaway isn't that you shouldn't eat blueberries. They're great. But the internet raises these false expectations, like they can cure diseases on their own.
It creates a magic bullet mentality.
It does.
Okay, that's a hard pivot for my brain.
Right.
But let's talk about the buzzword that is absolutely dominating the shelf right now. Clean. What does that even mean?
This is where it gets really interesting and honestly a little concerning. We looked at an article from Psychology Today on this. Just like superfood, there is no standard or legal definition for clean food.
That seems wild. If I buy clean bathroom cleaner, I expect it to clean some.
But clean food is totally subjective. For some people, it means gluten-free. For others, it means no additives. But the real danger here is the binary it creates.
If this food is clean,
Then by definition, other food must be dirty.
I see where you're going. It turns lunch into a moral issue.
It does. It can fuel disordered eating, something called orthorexia, where the obsession is with being pure. You start making choices based on judgment, not nutrition.
And the marketing teams know this. They know clean just feels better.
They absolutely do. Which brings us to the health halo effect. We have a study here from the Politecnico di Milano that shows this perfectly.
What do?
They showed consumers identical foods, chicken and rice. exactly the same. But one package had an eco label on it, saying it was sustainably produced.
I think I can guess what happened.
Consumers perceived the eco-labeled food as being tastier and healthier.
Even though the label was about sustainability, not nutrition.
That's the halo. One positive attribute, good for the planet, bleeds over into good for my body. It's a cognitive bias. The study even compared a clean chocolate cheesecake recipe to a standard one.
Let me guess. The clean one was still cheesecake.
It had just as much salt, sugar, and fat. But because it's labeled clean, you get permission to ignore the nutritional reality.
That's wild. Okay, so let's talk about what companies are actively removing or claiming to remove. The no artificial preservatives claim. If a label says that, we're safe from chemicals, right?
Well, that report from the Food Intolerance Network highlights something they call the clean label loophole. Consumers learn to avoid E-numbers and scary chemical names.
So the industry stopped using them.
No, they just renamed them. They replaced them with innocent-sounding ingredients that do the exact same chemical job.
Give me an example. What should we look for?
Let's talk about propionate. They're preservatives in bread to stop mold, listed as E280 to E283. But on a clean label, you'll see cultured wheat, cultured dextrose, or fermented flour.
Cultured wheat sounds artisanal, like sourdough.
It sounds lovely, but chemically, it's providing the same propionates. They use bacteria to generate the preservative inside the flour. And the source notes that excess propionate has been linked to behavioral issues in kids, insulin resistance.
And you think you're buying something traditional.
Exactly.
That is incredibly sneaky. What about MSG? That's the classic one.
Oh, that is a masterclass in renaming. You see no added MSG everywhere. But did you know there are 131 different ways to add glutamates to food?
131. I thought MSG was just MSG.
Only about 12 of those have to be explicitly labeled as flavor enhancers. The rest hide in plain sight. Yeast extract, vegetable extract, natural flavor.
Natural flavor, that's on everything.
It is, and it's often a vehicle for glutamates. There's even a new trick with processing aids. These are enzymes used during production to increase glutamate levels inside the food itself.
And they don't have to be labeled.
Sometimes not at all. So the no added MSG sticker is technically true, but they've just engineered the food to create its own.
It's chemistry by another name.
Precisely. Same with nitrates in uncured bacon. The label says no nitrates added, but the ingredients list celery powder.
Which naturally has nitrates.
And you get the same chemical result.
This feels like a game we can't win. And this brings us to the biggest category of all. Ultra-processed foods, or UPF. We hear this term a lot now. How does UNICEF define it?
So UNICEF distinguishes UPF from just processed food, chopping, cooking, canning. That's fine. Ultra-processed food is an industrial formulation. It has ingredients you'd never find in a home kitchen.
Like what?
Modified starches, hydrogenated fats, mechanically separated meat.
That's a pleasant image. So how do I spot it without a chemistry degree?
UNICEF gives a great rule of thumb. Look at the ingredient list. Is it long? Is it full of words you can't pronounce? It's likely UPF.
You mentioned a test for bread.
The squish test. Crust the bread. If it squishes flat and doesn't spring back like memory foam, it's likely ultra-processed. Real bread fights back a little.
That's a great tip, the squish test. But UPF isn't just junk food anymore, right?
No, and that's the protein gold rush we read about in that India Today article. Craze. Companies are fortifying everything with protein.
Protein water.
Protein water, protein ice cream. By slapping high protein on a package, they can market a highly processed product, like Besan Maggi noodles, as a wellness solution.
It's a distraction.
It distracts from the fact it's still an industrial product.
This feels like a pattern.
Yeah.
We fixate on one nutrient, and the industry just capitalizes on it. Has we seen this movie before?
We absolutely have. You just have to look back to the 1990s. We have that transcript from Frontline that covers the low-fat disaster.
Of the Snackwell era. I remember. We thought if we ate fat-free cookies, we'd lose weight.
And what happened? The message was, fat makes you fat. So the industry took the fat out. But fat provides flavor and texture.
Mouthfeel.
Right. So to make the food edible, they replaced the fat with sugar and refined carbohydrates.
So we just traded fat for sugar.
And calories. People saw fat-free and thought calorie-free. They ate the whole box. While the percentage of calories from fat went down, total calorie and sugar intake skyrocketed. It was a huge contributor to the obesity epidemic.
And today we're doing the exact same thing, just swapping the words. Instead of low fat, it's high protein or clean label.
Correct. Demonizing one thing, glorifying another, while the industry just shifts the formulation to keep us buying processed foods.
Which begs the question, Why is it so hard to get the truth? Why does science seem to flip-flop so much?
Well, you have to follow the money. That IP is Food report we reviewed is pretty damning on this. It looks at industry-sponsored science.
How bad is the bias?
It's significant. They cite one study on soft drinks. It found that 0% of industry-backed studies reported unfavorable outcomes.
0%. That's statistically impossible, isn't it?
It's highly suspicious, especially when you compare it to publicly funded studies on the same topic where 37% found unfavorable outcomes. The bias isn't always falsifying data. It's often in how you frame the question.
What do you mean by framing?
If you're a soda company, you don't fund research on sugar causing obesity. You fund research on active lifestyles and exercise.
So you shift the focus.
You shift the blame.
Mhm.
From the sugar in the drink to the individual's responsibility, you're not running enough. It puts the guilt on the consumer.
And there's another layer to this, right? The privatization of data.
Yeah, as public funding for research shrinks, private companies step in. That means they control the data on food safety and nutrition. It becomes opaque. We don't get to see the raw data.
So we have confusing labels, hidden additives, historical cycles of bad advice, and biased science. It feels a bit hopeless. What can the listener actually do?
It isn't hopeless, but you have to be a defensive shopper. UNICEF had some really excellent practical advice.
Okay, hit us with the tips. How do I survive the grocery store?
First, and this is the most important one, ignore the front of the package.
Just ignore it completely.
Completely.
Yeah.
Treat it like a billboard. That UNICEF study in Southeast Asia found that nearly 90% of health claims on kids' food were misleading. All natural, source of vitamin C. Just tune it out.
Okay, ignore the front. Turn it over.
Turn it over and read the ingredient list. That's your only source of truth. If the list is long, if it looks like a chemistry textbook, put it back. You want short lists with ingredients you recognize.
And avoid sugary drinks.
Avoid sugary drinks entirely. That's the single highest yield change you can make. And be very skeptical of expert endorsements in ads.
It really just comes back to simplicity.
It does. And I want to leave the listener with a thought from that Psychology Today article. This whole obsession with clean versus dirty food,
Mm.
it isn't just confusing, it's potentially psychologically damaging.
Right. When we moralize food, when we stress over every single additive.
We miss the simpler picture of just nourishment.
Mm.
Stressing over the cleanliness of your food is probably worse for your health than the occasional additive.
That's a great point.
Trust your own kitchen. Real food doesn't need a label to tell you it's healthy. An apple doesn't need a clean label sticker. It's just an apple.
I love that. Real food doesn't brag.
Ideally not.
Well, there you have it. The next time you see a superfood label, you'll know to look a little deeper. Don't let the marketing bully you. Trust your gut, literally. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Happy eating.